So welcome everyone to the 9th Cities Talk Nature webinar on building nature-based solution businesses in small and medium-sized cities. Before we start, I will quickly say a few words on some organizational issues. First of all, we have Spanish, English and English, Spanish translation available. You can access it by clicking the translation button in the bottom of the screen. Then some other issues. First of all, as you have seen already, the session will be recorded. If you do not agree to be recorded, please turn off your camera. Then we would like to ask you to keep your microphone off during the presentations. If you want to pose questions, you can either use the chat or raise your hand in the discussion after the presentations. And finally, if you need a certificate, please write an email to projektointerlace@ungl.or.cr. This webinar is part of the Cities Talk Nature event series in the framework of the Interlace project. The Interlace project aims to empower and equip European and Latin American cities to effectively restore urban ecosystem towards more livable, resilient, and inclusive cities. Cities Talk Nature offers a series of events to create and promote learning and cooperation between municipalities, their stakeholders, and initiatives in Latin America and in Europe. And today we have our 9th Cities Talk Nature webinar. It's a kind of special webinar because it's a kickoff of the Cities Talk Nature Business Insights series that will dive deeper into the particular challenges and opportunities for nature-based solution businesses. But my colleague David will introduce this a bit later to you. So before we start, and last but not least, we will show you a short video that will introduce the Cities Talk Nature network and the 4 city networks that are behind Cities Talk Nature. And for that, I would like to ask my colleague Carolina if you could share the video.
Interlace es un proyecto de cooperación internacional que tiene como objetivo restaurar y conectar entornos urbanos en ciudades de América Latina y Europa. Forma parte del programa de investigación e innovación Horizonte 2020 de la Unión Europea. El consorcio Interlace está integrado por 21 organizaciones de 11 países, en los que se destacan 6 ciudades: Envigado, Granollers, Cracovia, Chemnitz, Porto Viejo y Cebeima, centros de investigación, redes de ciudades y comunicación.
Como redes de ciudades, la Federación Latinoamericana de Municipios FLACMA y la Unión Nacional de Gobiernos Locales aportamos nuestra conexión y relación con los gobiernos locales de la región para que el aprendizaje y el desarrollo de herramientas que se genera desde Interlace lleguen a la mayor cantidad de municipios, facilitando y fomentando el intercambio de conocimientos y experiencias por medio de la comunidad de práctica, Ciudades por la Naturaleza, la cual lideramos en coordinación con nuestros aliados Climate Alliance y Ciudades de Gobiernos Locales Unidos, CGLU, a través de la organización de estos eventos virtuales y presenciales de diversas índoles.
Thank you very much. Then I will give the word to David for the introduction, and he will be the moderator of today's webinar.
Thanks so much, Felix. Welcome, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here with you on the kickoff of our Business Insights webinar series. And the topic today, which we'll be talking about, is an introduction to that series, building NBS businesses in small and medium-sized cities, which is the focus area of the Interlace project. And we'll be listening to a series of colleagues from NBS businesses discuss their success stories and some barriers and enablers for the success of their business and projects. Sorry. And like I said, we have an exciting webinar series set up for you in the coming months. This is the plan. Today we're in the first meeting, and the planned topics for the next 5 meetings. In September, we hope to have a webinar on looking at how nature-based companies have grown and gotten past the initial stages and reached 20 years maturity, and listen to some colleagues explain the stories of how their businesses have developed. In November, we'll discuss nature-based solution labs and collaborations between private business and public entities, municipalities, regional governments. In December, we want to look more closely at nature-based solution public procurement rules and how important they are as policies for promoting nature-based solutions, listen to some experiences on procurement. Moving into next year, we'd like to focus on standards and certification for nature-based solutions as policies for market creation. And the plan is that the last in the webinar series would be a summing up of advice and experiences we've heard over the previous 5 meetings on policy mixes for nature-based solutions in the private sector. And so a few slides from me to introduce the general topic of the webinar series and also the topic for today. The particularity of the Interlace project is that we work in small and medium-sized cities. And this is by no means a complete list, but there are a number of potential barriers to implementing nature-based solutions in small and medium-sized cities within our project and similar cities across the world. And rather than providing a complete list, I'd just like to say that a small and medium-sized city may be a barrier, but it may also be an opportunity. So for example, regarding barriers, some starting points might be that a small municipality has a small tax base, and so the budgets for funding blue-green infrastructure, nature-based solutions may be small, but I put a question mark because that might not always be the case. Small and medium cities represent smaller planning areas, sometimes only part of a catchment, so there might be externalities to planning, both coming from upstream municipalities and leading to impacts downstream of land use planning decisions in a small municipality. Smaller cities have smaller staff by definition, and perhaps less expertise in blue-green infrastructure and nature-based solutions, but perhaps not. It depends on the context. But also, small and medium-sized cities present opportunities. Often in peri-urban areas, they have perhaps more unbuilt space and opportunities for blue-green design in development of commercial property and housing. Smaller municipalities have fewer and perhaps more familiar actors, which can facilitate implementation of nature-based solutions in projects. Smaller bureaucracies and perhaps shorter procurement processes. And perhaps in the case of smaller cities being far from the capital, they might also access extraordinarily regional development funds that aren't available to the capital city. So it depends on the context. These might be limitations, but there might also be opportunities, and the cases we'll see today and in the coming webinars will give us a sense of how this context affects likely successes for nature-based solutions. There are barriers to business models for nature-based solutions. There are many, but some of the ones that companies or businesses starting up face is that in any city there's limited physical space for nature-based solutions and often competition for grey solutions that may be more compact in the context of very high land use values. Nature-based solutions provide, and that's why we like them, they provide a lot of public goods, public good benefits, i.e. Difficult to commercialize, difficult to capture, to earn money off through their very nature of being public goods, ecosystem services of many types. And finally, nature-based solutions, companies in many cities face a missing demand from the private sector, which may be due to lacking market creating policies, to say it in short. What we'll be trying to understand through listening to the great presentations from different companies from Europe and Latin America is in what context, policy context, are the projects they're going to present us, and how we expect to see that providing policy for nature-based solutions and a business model is not merely subsidizing or providing financial incentives, but it relies on a mix of policy instruments, regulatory instruments to create the opportunities for nature-based solutions to be required in projects, knowledge and communication and innovation instruments to help find new solutions, more cost-effective solutions, and agreements, for example, for cost sharing to implement nature-based solutions in public land as part of private development. And all these things often come together in combination to create a market for nature-based solutions. And this is what we want to explore through a number of guests we invite to this series. So I'm really pleased today to have 4 guest speakers. Gustavo Gonzalez, David Borja Bet Mota, and Grace Yepes. The structure and a bit of housekeeping for the presentations today is that we'll do the presentations in this order. Each of the speakers will have 15 minutes. During their presentation, you're very welcome to post questions in the chat. And I'd like to ask the speakers to reserve then 5 minutes at the end of this 20-minute slot for each of them to pose some of these questions in the chat to them. At the end of this, these 3 introductions, Grace Yepes will help us as a discussant to raise some broader questions regarding barriers, enablers, and the policy context for these cases that we've seen. So it's really my pleasure now. I'll stop sharing my screen and let's see here. It's a bit of technology. So it's my pleasure to introduce Gustavo Gonzalez from GGNS Arquitectos. He's a landscape architect. It's based in Junín, Manabí in Ecuador, and he's currently leading the urban and landscape design firm GGNS. He aims to create aesthetic and welcoming urban and rural environments, respecting ecosystems and natural processes. It's a real great pleasure, Gustavo, to have you with us. And I'd invite you to share your presentation mode screen, and you have 15 minutes to present your wonderful success stories.
Thank you, David. Thank you to the organizers. Un saludo cordial a los presentes. Voy a presentar en español.
If you could load the presentation mode and then share the screen, then we would see the presentation. I think now we're seeing, there you go, that's it, perfect.
Yes, okay.
Okay. So my company has been introduced, so I'm not going to focus on that, but I do want to say that we're very interested in the integration of the city and nature to be able to understand the logic, which doesn't always coincide. Sometimes the different logics contrast, but through design we try to find solutions satisfying human needs and we can also adapt to natural processes. So today I'm going to present two brief case studies. One was a park built in Puerto Viejo, and then the second is a park that was planned for Puerto Viejo for this year. I arrived in the city in 2015. It's a medium-sized company with city with 200,000 inhabitants. It's located along the Ecuadorian coast, along 17 kilometers of the Pacific Ocean. As you can see in this image from 2015, at the time, there was a large corridor with a river, although in some parts it had been made smaller and thinner to the extent that it led to continuous floods. In 2016, there was an earthquake. It was devastating. It destroyed part of the city and ruined people's lives, the economy. It was a very tough time, a moment for reflection, which became an inflection point. So at the time, the leadership, so the mayor at the time, started to think about designing a new city, a more integrated city, integrated with nature, that was able to better fulfill the needs for mobility and green needs in the city. And they put us in charge of the master planning of the city, so we created the master plan. I'm only going to touch upon this topic linked to green infrastructure briefly. So in that moment, we proposed the creation of a series of green spaces and parks throughout the corridor of the river in the city. So it was a green belt surrounding the city. It was adopted by the municipality via an ordinance, and as part of these efforts, we designed and built the park that I'm going to show you, the Las Vegas Park. It's a park that is on the riverbed, and it's near the financial and administrative center of the city. It has 10.5 acres, and this area was quite ruined and affected because it was affected by the earthquake, and a lot of buildings were knocked down. So this basically affected the area, the quarry, and we found an area that was truly in awful conditions. The riverside was very thin, the river was difficult to access. It was impossible to access the river in some places. We did hydrological and biological studies to understand what was going on, and we realized that due to how thin the river was, the periphery neighborhoods were suffering floods. So our proposal has first of all been to recreate part of the original morphology of the riverside. We took away some of the filler material, and we were trying to restore access for these people to the river. In most places of the city, this wasn't possible. People had occupied the area right up to the riverbed and the riverside rather, and so we basically filled this area right up to the river. And we can see an artificial hill here, that little green stain at the top. And I'd also like to highlight the blue stain further up above the green one, where there was a meandering river that was abandoned. And when we intervened, it was basically a hole. And people were using it for landfill, as a landfill site, an improvised landfill site for the neighborhood. and we managed to rescue that. Our proposal started by freeing the riverside and creating access via terraces from which you could see the river at different levels, the river bank, and you can see the lower area with certain seating areas. So it became an amphitheatre, outside, outdoors, and different people come to Porto Viejo, and it creates large audiences for different events. This is a short video where we can see the little hill, the theatre on the theatre. We can see a small area that connects with the river. We can see the riverbanks, and this space became a kind of moor. So we've recreated old ecosystems in this wetland, and so new migrating birds have come back, and we still haven't reached all 108 birds, but this has truly motivated and sparked people's interest. So here we can see a video of the birds.
With more changing the natural forest to farmland and pasto, these species are having smaller spaces for their food and nesting. Across the river, you've got lots of green. You have mame, which is really wow. And then this. And so, yeah, you know, they're flying over and they're like, ooh. So it's incredible that you have this park here for the birds.
This has created an opportunity. Park served as a window to nature, and people can start to really appreciate this space in the city and visit it more frequently. So I think that's one of the opportunities that have been created with these parks when you have a focus on nature, and people really start to awaken that idea of how useful this is for the neighborhood and the city. So this led to a more ambitious project, which is the creation of the bike park known as La Tomatera. It's an area with hills in the city, for the city of Porto Viejo and Rio Chico. The park contains 1,227 acres. As you can see, it is surrounding the city, and right next to the city you have a dry forest, a natural space with lots of biodiversity. And this is really important because these tropical rainforests, but dry forests, are quickly disappearing. I think there's only 2% of what we had 150 years ago. So this will continue because of the expansion of the border. So this is why it's important to have a park in the city with these characteristics. And there's a lot of conservation going on in these areas. And we can see the areas that have been affected along the road between Rio Chico and Porto Viejo, and there's an area for bikes. There's also an area where restoration is taking place. These are the practices in agriculture, the negative practices, and they represented about 70%, especially in the worst areas where flooding was worse. And the meteorological study that we performed showed that there was There were floods, and there had been floods for about 25 years. And we created a system of small dams within the rivers with 2 retention zones, and they fulfill other kind of functions in the habitat. Then we have an area for people to cycle. It's become very popular. It became very popular during the pandemic, and lots of people use the park to cycle. Then there's also nature tourism, which is growing. As I said before, Las Vegas, with its deployment of birds, and La Tomatera has also been included in the circuit for ornithologists and bird watchers, partly because of the great work of our ornithologist Lisa Brunetti, who is the kind of guardian of the area. She has many protocols and contacts from Cornell and other institutions that visit us, and that really awakens or sparks interest in people in the city. So we want to foster this through guided tours by nature enthusiasts, with also viewing points in the forest itself. This is a master plan where you can see the different interventions in the area, which have been minimal. They're more kind of along the road as such, with the exception of these pathways 4 and 6 for nature enthusiasts, and then we have the main one, which is kind of an urban park, and it's the one that people use the most, but we call it the Hidden Valley. Number 5 is where you have the cycle paths with lots of kind of areas for bikes. Then we have number 2, the Parador. This is the entrance to the park and the control point. You can leave your cars there and walk in, or use a bike, or also take a little bus that helps people who cannot move as well. So we have the Parador site here. We have a lagoon, which is a kind of wetland or marsh, and this is what it usually looks like most of the year, but sometimes there are big hydrological events, and so it acts as a water reserve and protects some neighborhoods. Here we see the Parador. We can see a small artificial river where water circulates to provide oxygen and maintain the quality of water. This is treated using solar power. And inside this space, we can see that it's an open space that's integrated with the forest. And this is the area that I was talking about before, the Hidden Valley, which, due to its topography and due to the characteristics of its vegetation, it lends itself to become an almost urban park with pathways, and it can be accessed by all. It also has spaces for shelter, and it could also host camping spots, which doesn't really exist in Manabí, and gradually we can increase camping sites depending on the demand for it. This is briefly what I wanted to show you, and a quick reflection at the end. I grew up in the city of Cuenca, and this is the park, the central park of the city, and this is what we believe to be a park. This is what we knew to be a park. It's a space that doesn't really pose any challenges. You could easily sit there like you would in your own home, in your living room, and it has very little wildlife in it. It has certain sparrows and myrtles, and it creates a space in the city within nature in a respectful way. So this is my dream, this image of Usot. I think it's inspiring to try to really understand why we're scared of nature and what attracts us to it and really working on designs. I always try to think about how we can create windows from which we can become enamored with our environment or surroundings and connect better to them. And this way we can contribute to the improvement of the relationship between man and nature. That's all. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Gustavo. This was truly inspiring. The two projects, La Tomatera and Las Vegas Parks. And we have an option of posting questions in the chat for our presenters. If there are no questions I'd like to ask of you, but actually I've seen that some questions are coming up. So Gustavo, Ramses Morante asks, what were the biggest challenges when you were performing these projects? Did you find resistance in social aspects? Yes, there was. The first project did see some resistance because after the earthquake, some people would oppose investing in a park, considering that there were many other needs, such as broken infrastructure, material loss suffered by everybody. But once the park was built, all that resistance disappeared because people saw that it was a healing place. It was a place for meetings and encounters, and I think that the city now loves its parks. It's not the only, these aren't the only parks. There are obviously other parks like Anaconda Park with many acres, but these places have basically given the city a new face, and the population now loves its parks and wants to maintain them. There are other kinds of barriers, as I mentioned before, but it's more linked to the traditional system and way of thinking and the type of engineering that still dominates public works. So it's the engineers who have been trained towards grey infrastructure, and they are given the budgets. So 90% of the budgets go to them. So there are some difficulties, but it's important to generate awareness, and that's the important thing, the awareness that's arising. Okay, we have time for one more question, and I'd like to go ahead and ask if you could discard just one policy in the municipality, what's the most important policy, or what are the lessons learned in terms of these policies that foster these solutions? You obviously mentioned the master plan as a central document, obviously, but which other enabling factors could you kind of rescue from Porto Viejo? The other one was the mitigation of risks. We were working on the riverbanks, and we had created a model to understand the floods in the future and what they would lead to in the neighborhoods, and this discussion was included in the master plan as well. And so we arrived at a policy to create areas for the protection of riverbanks and the creation of public reserves and spaces for the public, which really helps to create new parks, and also the excitement of having farming activities in the city in areas near the rivers. So creating a farming park, that was another policy that's interesting that we thought that was created because it maintains food security as well. And it brings part of what the countryside has to the cities. Okay, thank you very much. I feel like we could look at this case for the entire webinar. Unfortunately, we have to continue. If we have the opportunity, we'd like to invite you again to the webinar to be able to learn more about the work you're doing. But thank you very much for this presentation. Yes, of course. Regards to you all. Thank you. Thank you. I hope that you can.
Our next presenter is David Borja from Blackwaters Engineering. Blackwaters is a company specializing in the application of science and technology for the development of nature-based solutions, focused on sustainable and regenerative design in tropical urban spaces based in Costa Rica. And David Borja is director of Blackwaters. David, the floor is yours. Bienvenido y welcome to load up your presentation in presentation mode.
Muy buenos días a todos y todas. Es un placer estar aquí. Well, thank you very much for this opportunity to share a few of my knowledge. I will do my presentation in English as well. So I will start sharing, okay? So I guess here's my presentation. Let me know if you can see my screen.
We're still waiting.
Let me see. Okay. Here's
what's best, what the best. It's indicative.
Yes, I got some problems here to sharing. They asked me for.
I think what we'll do then, my apologies for the technical problems. If they continue, we'll definitely invite you back to a future webinar, but let's hope they work themselves out. In the meanwhile, I'd like to ask Bet Mota to give her presentation while David checks out the technical issues. So Bet, if you're ready, I invite you to share your presentation, and then we can come back to David.
Okay, thank you very much, David.
Yeah.
I will speak in Spanish.
You're welcome.
Okay, I will share it. 1 minute.
Let me introduce you, Bet. That was very rude of me just to say, jump in. So Bet, you're from Naturalia in Catalonia. Naturalia is a company specialized in the design and implementations of systems for the restoration and conservation of natural spaces. They're a specialist and pioneer in the use of landscape bioengineering in the Iberian Peninsula. And Bet, you're responsible for the drafting of executive projects at Naturalia. And we're really excited to hear what you have to tell us today from Catalonia. Welcome.
Okay, thanks.
You need to start in presentation mode and then share the screen. Yeah.
No, but it's not.
Okay, so it's not working as it was before. Okay, maybe now it's working. Let me see. Okay, now it's working. Okay, first of all, thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here with you all. Okay, first of all, I'm going to tell you where I'm from. the company Naturalia, then we're going to look at different projects. Naturalia is a company that is specialized in the restoration of natural life, but also within cities with nature-based solutions. In Spain, we are one of the pioneers in the use of bioengineering, landscape bioengineering, which I'll tell you a little bit more about later. We have more than 26 years of experience and around 1,000 works executed. And we always say that we want to work with nature and for nature. Within Naturalia, we have 3 branches. They're all interconnected, but we have basically we draft projects, emblematic restoration projects. Then we have a team of people internally in the company that execute these works. We design them and we are also able to execute these works. Then we have a third prong, which is research. We always move forward with advancements, and when we see that we are missing information or we have kind of questions about projects and works, we try to start research projects that help us resolve these queries. As we have said before, we have a few keys to success. We have a multidisciplinary team. We really focus on research, but we also really believe in networks. So that social fabric of different associations and corporate groups at the European level and also at the state level that work together to be able to improve and discover new systems, etc. One of the examples is the Urban River Lab. It's a lab that we have in Montevideo, which is close to Barcelona. It's a city close to Barcelona, and we have some channels, and they basically produce artificial rivers, and via the substrate and plants, we try to discover the best way of improving the quality of water. Most of our rivers come from filtered water because we don't have water that circulates. So this filtered water is obviously filtered and complies with standards, but it has certain things that aren't natural, like medication or things that aren't great. So we want to see how plants help us improve the quality of water. This is one of our examples. We have a web page that has a lot of information that you can look at. We have different areas of work, and 94% of our work is done through public procurement. The private sector still doesn't really desire these nature-based solutions. We also really believe in communication and outreach. We have a web page where we load lots of information about both our research projects and also construction works and these kinds of projects, because the more people we reach, the more general the knowledge in nature-based solutions will be, and perhaps that will lead to more demand. So we don't keep that information to ourselves. We share all our experiences to anyone who might want to share that information. We're completely willing to share it. Now I'm going to talk about a few projects. First of all, I don't know if you're all familiarized with landscape bioengineering. Landscape bioengineering is the use of natural materials, so things like trunks, parts of plants, and more, including structural elements, or using them as structural elements rather. So one example is in Sant Hilari Sacalm. It's a river that was being crossed or where there were these cement walls. So we performed a hydraulic study. We removed the cement, recovered the morphology of the area, and based on that, we saw that to protect these banks, we had to create different structures. Where the impact of the roads and the structures was highest, we created a creep wall, so a structure with trunks, and we created the structure within the infrastructure. So when it's built, the idea is that it should work and protect the edges. This is chestnut wood, by the way. And as it becomes degraded, that plant that we have planted has generated roots by then. And with its roots, it can protect the area. So we're protecting the wood with live plants. You can see the results here. This is immediately after execution. You can see the logs and the plants grow little by little, but then after the years, as the years go by, it becomes a natural river. And so all the services, all the ecosystemic services basically provide us with a natural river. We always say when we go to works that if we can't see our works, then they are a success. And in this case, in the final photograph, you can see the results. So it's completely different if you look at a channel with a river with cement structures compared to the naturalized river that we achieved. So all these ecosystemic services are associated with it. So landscape, soil humidification, aquifers, recharge. This is another success story. It's in Vila de Gans, it's near Barcelona too. A new industrial polygon was created, and they had to create a navigation kind of boat to remove superficial water that was accumulating because there was no kind of hill for the water to run. It's 18,000 square meters, and initially with this boat or this area, we wanted it to be a kind of hole in the middle of the area, and we thought this is a really good opportunity to have a live, living ecosystem instead of just deposit. We got to the aquifer by excavating a little bit more, by digging a little bit more. We managed to access more water, which increases the biodiversity of the space. And we planted vegetation that allows for the level of the water to rise. And so it was great, but we had another challenge, which was that all the water that we gather from superficial areas and water and these waterproof areas are contaminated because they are cleaning the oils and hydrocarbons and different things from the streets and the solid particles as well. So if we let this water reach the stream, then it would generate a lot of pollution. So what we did was create green filters. We wanted the water to go through these green filters before reaching the main water area. How did we do that? There we go. So how did we do that? We created a waterproof area with sheets, and we created vegetable zones in these ponds, so we could have a green filtering area so that any water reaching the pond would be of the best and most optimal quality. So you can see the pond, which is half full after rain. We can see that some of the vegetation is covered with water, and it's able to sustain these changes in the water, in the levels. We can see a general image. It has been a total success because on the side we have a shopping center. So people have gone to the area. They're not allowed to go down there because we want to preserve it, but they can observe it, and it also attracts birds. So results have been very good. Another case is at a school. Nature-based solutions can be anywhere really, and this is a school that had a garden with hills where there was a lot of erosion, and therefore the garden wasn't being used because there was no shelter, for example. So it wasn't really an area that was being used. So we created different terraces with bioengineering. And the good thing about this project is that the students got involved. So they all participated in the process, in the definition and execution, etc. So where there was previously a garden that wasn't being used because there was no shelter and there was lots of erosion, it has now become a garden that they use, and it's also part of the educational project of the school. Another example is a farming or agricultural park near Barcelona. We always work around Barcelona in the outskirts, and there were lots of problems with the loss of surfaces because irrigation channels were basically eroding the margins of the channels. So different countries are saying that they wanted to protect these banks, creating breakwaters or sea walls with rocks, and it's very costly. So they asked us whether we had any alternatives instead of having to invest all this money in spaces where we have water on a permanent basis. So using vegetation is a good system in these areas. And what we did was perform very simple planting measures. We used different techniques that we tested to see which one was the best effort to protect the edges. And you can see we have different systems here. In the end, we saw that the minimal interventions work too. So we saw that eventually where you had erosion, we implemented this planting, and we created a continual border of vegetation that was protecting the edges. And because we worked with local species, we were able to choose the ones that better adapted to the area. But we didn't want vegetation to grow too much because it would create shelter or shadows on the field that needed sun. So we used plants from the area that could help in structural terms, but also that wouldn't generate shadows for the crops. So I'm going very quick. If you have I'm going quickly, so please let me know if you have questions. So when it comes to using nature-based solutions, we have found that over the last 10 years, there's been exponential growth in the demand for NBSs on the part of the public sector, especially by local administrations. We also find that the knowledge and the experience of the technicians in administration at the local level in this case, but also at the territorial level, is greater over time. So they're gaining more and more technical knowledge over time. And many times it is the engineers themselves that boost or lead projects and convince political leaders for them to be carried out. So that's one aspect. On the other hand, when they come to look for us, it's usually during the last stage, because nature-based solutions tend to be cheaper than other engineering solutions that are more conventional. So sometimes we want to create a huge cement wall to protect a border, but perhaps if we do a water study and see that the speed of the water isn't too great, then we can use vegetation without creating costly structures. We also see that these NBS solutions solve issues that sometimes classical engineering does not resolve. The best example is the water that washes streets and then goes into the rivers. If we had to install a mechanism that can purify this water before getting to the river, then it would be very costly. But we can use plants to purify the water so it can improve the quality, and at the economic level, this simply leads to significant savings for protection against floods and other things. So often, financially speaking, it's much cheaper to have a solution like this than a classic solution. And we've seen that over time, citizens are starting to demand green spaces more and more over time. They want better quality in the air, also more areas for shelter. And this reverts the demand for the execution of projects. Because since the pandemic, we could clearly see that people needed green areas and they needed to be in contact with nature. And the local administration, which receives the input directly from citizens, is starting to hear about this and understand it. And we think that so we're working on creating greener cities with more comprehensive solutions. And so that was my presentation. If you have any questions, let me know. Excellent.
You covered an amazing number of projects. You described the company and you also talked about the policy environment. So thanks so much for covering all of that in 15 minutes. We have time for one question before we go back to David. I don't see any questions in the chat, so I'm going to ask a question myself. In your introduction, you mentioned that 94% of Naturalia's business is still funded by the public sector and only 6% by the private sector. You did present one case from Via de Cans, which was an industrial project. I think that must have been funded by private funds, or was it public?
No, this was expressly requested by the public administration. It was as a form of compensation for urbanization. The expenses were covered by a private entity that was performing the planning, but only because there was a specific requirement from the public administration that was asking them to have a solution, a nature-based solution. But the promoter of the industrial area came to talk to us because he wanted more. He wanted a less conventional project, a more advanced project. And the construction company was definitely interested in these kinds of solutions, but it was basically an administrative public project.
Oh, we have a question here, so I'll let that go. It's Adi Carrera who asks, "La voluntad política es esencial."
Adi Carrera asks for the political will. Well, she says, "But political will is essential. How can we promote these kinds of solutions among authorities?" For a long time now, we've been working in this sector. In the beginning, what we used to do was have proposals or mini projects that we would do for free to convince people, lots of photographs, lots of explanations. So when they were asking us, what would you do here? We would basically create a project that we would not charge, just so people could understand what we wanted to do and our political will. And that's how we managed to move ahead and progress. And on the other hand, I think citizens are also exerting pressure so that politicians, I mean, they'll have to basically act if this is what the citizens are requesting. So that's basically it.
A lot of free work, a lot of demonstration, a lot of investment to begin with, but slowly this is becoming a market also in the private sector. So this was excellent. I think that we'd love to have you back sometime to hear more. But for the moment, we have to be happy with your 15 minutes. So great to have you with us. Thank you very much. And now I hope you stay on. And I'd like to see if we can get back to David Borge and Blackwaters. David, are you with us?
Yeah, I will try.
Yeah.
Okay, let's do it. So let me know if you can see my window.
Yeah. So we can see the PowerPoint mode. If you launch PowerPoint first and then share your screen, then it's gonna. There you go. Thank you. Perfect.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. As I said, I will do my presentation in English as well, and all the slides will be right in Spanish. So if you have any question in Spanish, let me know. So I will talk about one single project that is one is called for this presentation. We are a very small company based in San Jose, Costa Rica. We got already like 5 years working with nature-based infrastructure, nature-based solutions. And the case that I will present to you is a case of runoff control in the province of Heredia. It's located in Belén, Costa Rica. So this park is Park H. Park H is a different kind of project than what we see before with the other keynote speakers. So this place is actually used to be like an urban park in the middle of a small neighborhood, which had a lot of problems with runoff and flood. For me, it was a surprise when I saw the very first videos of the neighbors. When I do my modeling, I saw this river crossing the park. I can't believe when I see the video. I really start believing what is happening in this place. So what we propose for this project is already it's a runoff control made by simple solution of infiltration and evaporation rate. So we got already a few projects in Costa Rica. For example, this is a G Park, same in Belén, in Cariari. This is a private park for one project in Ozara, Guanacaste, for runoff control. This place got a lot of flood problems. We already designed the very first green roof in public space for the municipality of Belén. It's 100 square meters. It's designed in a single deck metal roof. So it's this lightweight. And this is another project that we already working with. This Urasti Liner Park, which is in the middle of the railroad of the train, which is then part of the municipality of Belén. The main purpose for this infrastructure is to control the runoff and control the dust in the dry season. Let's go back to the project of the Park H. So when we start
Sorry,
thinking about sorry,
we lost your presentation mode there for a minute.
No, I will go back to the main presentation of the project. So we got here the slides of the Park H project. So what we got here is in the very first time where we did is capture reality. For that we use on-craft managed aircraft or drones to capture the reality. We use LiDAR technology and photogrammetry. Then we make this small model to have the whole context of the place.
I'm sorry,
then
David. David, sorry, we can't see the screen, the presentation mode anymore.
Sorry. Okay. Let's go back.
There you are.
Okay.
Thank you.
And okay. In the very first time, what we did is we work with a lot of technology. We work with drones, for example, to capture reality. So we use LiDAR technology and photogrammetry to try to have the very best context for our architects to start designing by pixel, by centimeter. That's important because if we don't have the real context of the project or the problem, we can design anything. So we use drones and remote sensing technology to start designing this. In this case, this is the H Park. What we did is we use as a simple solution. We design a small trench of infiltration in the main parts, as we see in the model. And this is the renders of the park. And the principal things that we control is evaporation and infiltration to control the runoff and the flood in the main project. So Blackwater is a small company that is growing so fast in the last 5 years. So we are working together with the Instituto Tecnológico of Costa Rica and the Tech. We designed a new laboratory for nature-based solutions for flood control and erosion control. And the last year, we are already cooperating with them. So we are ready to launch for the next year a few new investigations and research for helping Costa Rica cities to solve all these problems. And here's one example. This is the Park H already building. This is a normal example what great infrastructure did. This is that it doesn't matter if you put a big pipe in the sewer system. It's not enough. All the cities all around the world is flooded already, and they need a new type of solution, a new type of design thinking about a new way to construct. What we did in H Park is a new hydrological scheme. We put this gradable stabilization system, which have a lot of power to infiltrate the water who is coming from all the neighbors, and we put it in this upper layer, which is a type of tank. And here's a video about the park already finished. There's a kind of trail, and when you see all this dirt coming up, is the water coming into the system. All these walls coming up with runoff, and we control this. The total length of this solution is like 1,500 meters, linear meters, and it will put a lot of vegetation in this naked part of the ground. So this is already stabilized. You can walk with wheelchairs and high heels and whatever. It doesn't have any problem. It's already stabilized. It works like a tank, but people can use it. You can use it for a ride, for a walk with the dog or with a girlfriend or whatever. So this is what I got for you guys. So thank you very much for your time. So if we have any questions, so let me know. I'll be here.
That's great, David. Thank you so much for presenting Parque H and for also talking a bit about the projects you have in Blackwaters. We have two questions in the chat already. First question from Matthew Stiller-Reeve, and he's complimenting not only your presentation but all the others. But he would like to know, these are lovely examples, but were there any notable barriers that needed to be overcome? And so for you, David, what were the barriers that you needed to overcome to implement Parque H?
Okay, I need to effort, like this park is not connected to the sewer system of the municipality. It's disconnected. They already have enough control power to infiltrate the old runoff that's coming up. So for us, maybe the problems that we reach across the years is maybe traditional engineering designs, but it will disappear when you show science and hard data. When you show this data, people just trust what you do or trust what you design, and that's what is important always. If you present something, it should be together with strong science and data. If you don't have a strong science and data, nobody will believe in you. So this is important for us, and this is important for everyone. So this problem is all around the world, not just Costa Rica, Latin America, or Europe. It's all around the world. So what we need is putting more effort in data and science to show these things just works, and that's it.
I think you might have answered it partially, but Ramses Morante is asking, ¿hacia dónde se canaliza el agua del parque?
Okay, I will say this in Spanish.
The park is disconnected completely from the sewage system. It's completely disconnected. It has sufficient capacity in order to control the water, the park, within the park itself. The entire system can control it with it. It's completely disconnected from the sewage system.
Okay, that was a short and very clear answer. And this is specifically then a nature-based solution. The water is managed locally. I'd like to get back to other barriers. You showed a slide where you talked about different policies that could be needed in Costa Rica to promote your business. And I'm wondering, apart from the science, which is you're responsible for, what can, for example, the municipality of Belén, where I understand this Parque H is located, how did the municipality help realize this project and help you and Blackwaters develop this business?
Belén is a particularly sweet city. Is down under from the down part of Heredia province. So they receive all the water who came from the mountains. So they usually get flooded often. So they are open-minded to find solutions to control the problem. So when they give me an opportunity to start doing something for them, they are open-minded for something new. So I start proposing this new way of nature-based infrastructure design, more in the regeneration way. So they starting moving forward for their politics. So right now they are open-minded to design a new flooded park to protect the people, and they can use it in the dry season for enjoy and fun. So right now, municipality of Belén is the very first municipality who is implementing this in Costa Rica, and we are actually working in more than 10 municipalities right now. I can show the projects because we are already finished. So we are doing something good for our country, our region.
So thanks so much. Unfortunately, again, we have to move on. I'd love to invite you back later. It was excelente, muchísimas gracias. Muy corto el tiempo, pero vamos a seguir. Ahora tenemos we have the opportunity of inviting, saying thank you to David Borja and inviting Grace Yepes from Yes Innovation, who's been following the presentations and the conversations and questions and been taking some notes and questions regarding especially the barriers and policy enablers for these kind of solutions that we've seen. Grace Yepes is from Yes Innovation, and Yes Innovation is based in Quito and seeks to introduce new practices and new technologies in architecture and urbanism in Latin America. Sustainability, resilience, and urban nature are the main focuses of Yes Innovation, and Grace is the co-founder and director of the company. So Grace, we have 15 minutes for you to ask some questions, discuss some of your views. I think we have to ask the participants to stay with us for 10 minutes longer than planned because we had a few delays. I hope that's okay for everyone. So please, the floor is yours to raise some of the synthesis points from these cases.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Good day or good afternoon to each and every one of you. Thank you, David, for the invitation. These presentations have been very, very interesting, especially because not only do they inspire, but they also showcase what is actually being done and that things are being done and from different sides of things. I think it's very interesting, the fact that companies are actually undertaking these challenges, because we've seen that many people invest in their works as they spoke the simple fact of having projects that showcase the power of these things, as David said, and also, as Beth said, having data about what is being proposed is important. And as what Gustavo said, not taking advantage of the information of these spaces in order to turn them around. That's important. You need to take advantage of that, turning a challenge into an opportunity. I think that's a very interesting strategy. We think that the company, private companies need to create these new ways of seeing things and looking at the territory, especially in this climate change context. So I had noticed some things. I'm going to open up a tool that I had worked on with to speak a little bit about this and ask the appropriate questions. Please confirm if you're seeing my screen, the image, my mural. Yes, but it's a bit small, but yes, we do see it. Yeah, so as I was telling you, I color coded it so people could understand me a little bit better. And our colleagues spoke about many things about the simple fact of understanding nature-based responses and thinking about local wealth and thinking about nature and trying to work for and pro nature and together with nature, as Vet said, and the fact of becoming a specialist. And this point, I wanted to tell you as well that we, as a private company, we ask ourselves, what can be an actual true barrier for these types of proposals? What can be the true barrier? And I would like to ask Gustavo this, because they're challenging the political perspective with a new proposal. So I'm not sure if Gustavo, you're here. I'm going to ask Bet and David to please turn on your cameras as well. Yes, I'm here. Hello, Gustavo. What a pleasure to see you. I wanted to ask you about the barriers. What were those barriers that you found during this specific project? And what do you think? How did you transform it into an opportunity? And not only seeing the challenge, but how you transformed it into an opportunity? Well, in terms of barriers, there was a lot of skepticism, and certain sectors of the city sometimes were quite skeptic, especially from certain professional associations. We had a lot of doubt. At the end of the day, I think that what determined the success was the usage and the user. I think there was a lot of doubt or skepticism to the ideas of allowing the river to be the river and to allow one part of the park to be flooded. When I proposed that solution, we were thinking, or the city was thinking, no, not the city, but just a few people from the city thought that allowing the park to be flooded, which was recently flooded, was absurd. And in reality, when it actually happened and when we tested it during a real flood the next year, the park worked perfectly. It trapped flooding. The people, the areas that needed to be flooded were flooded, but then there was no problems. There was no damage caused by the flooding. Everything was calculated in order to trap the flood. That fact that we saw in the field, that broke the barrier. And it gave us way more credibility before the public administration, and it promoted the municipality that had taken a risk together with me. So I think sometimes we have to take risks. I had the opportunity and the fortune of working with a political leader in Guadavid with lots of vision. And in one way or another, he allowed us to take these risks, to assume these risks, and to face challenges that had not been faced in the past. And these are opportunities that come up and we have to grasp them and take over them immediately. Perfect. About taking risk is very interesting, yes. Because of course, when we take risks, Gustavo, thank you so much for that explanation. It also allows you to overcome barriers. How do you overcome barriers? I bet. Forgive me, when you were speaking, you could cut off, so I missed a little part. No, we were talking about the barriers. So the issue that Gustavo was talking about, precisely taking risks makes barriers be able to be overcome. And when he spoke about risk, the projects that you showcased show us that you're challenging those risks as well. So how do you see barriers, and how has been your response? How do you see your response to these challenges? Well, I think we see more and more acceptance, and people are suffering less and less when they see the types of public works. What we did find in the very beginning were people against, no, the rivers have to be clean. The rivers have to have no vegetation because vegetations in the rivers create flooding. And in the beginning, there was some resistance. It is true that, as Gustavo said, once we made the work and it was started to work, there was no problem. All the problems end once it's already done. So I think that there's more and more examples now, and people are more at peace now and more certain that these solutions are reliable and necessary, I would say. So one solution would be to have example solutions as you had done. Hey, look, we've already done several other public works. Yes, we did several different public works, sometimes not even unpaid, to showcase that there was a different way of doing things. What was the process like to overcome these barriers? How did you jump into the water without any financing, which is always scary? Well, here in Naturalia, we have the fortune that the technical director, which is the promoter, has always been a visionary, has always been jumping in to test out new things. And he has intuition that it would work, and he was convinced that it worked. And that's how we've advanced. Free. Well, projects and works, not so much, because not the company would not work. But in fact, we have done many volunteer things, and we work with volunteers in different ecological associations or territorial organizations. We've tested a lot of voluntary work, and volunteers have been part of the essence of Naturalia from the very beginning. So your research line also helped you to overcome many barriers, right? Yes, without a doubt, without a doubt. Currently, we still have many questions: how the role of vegetation, how the role of natural systems. And sometimes you are convinced about something, but if you don't have real data or research to back it up, it's difficult to convince people. And with the ORL, which is the Open Sky Lab, we can have empirical data, real data related to the beginning and after we go through the system. And that helps quite a bit. Pre and post helps us convince public authorities or whoever we need to convince that these are functional systems. Without a doubt, it's important, very important, to work on research and to have reliable results, and with our field tests, etc. So I think you coincide with what David was telling us about the data and science being able to overcome barriers, because it actually shows examples of things, it demonstrates things. That's very important. I want to ask David something, because he talked about science and data. How did you generate that science and that data? Because in Latin American cities, opposition is based on a lack of knowledge, and that has created resistance. We know gray engineering, but not green engineering. How did you overcome these challenges? Well, normally, I'm not even sure how to answer your question, but I'm going to try to answer it in the following fashion. Normally, everything that I design always has to have data to back it up. If you have no robust data, I don't know, I'll just not do it. I'll dedicate my time to something else. So from day one, when I began with my job, with my role, there's only 3 of us. We're a very small team. I, the architect, and the geotechnician. I'm a specialist in hydrology and hydraulic hydrology. So for us, it's very important to have these safety features, and not only we model the different climate change scenarios as well. And we do projections, which are not so alarmist, but rather we show the population, well, it's possible that the river is going to go up 5 centimeters by 2050. And I'm not telling you that you have to build this. I'm just saying that you have to be careful and you have to have design principles sufficient so that the water will not ruin your infrastructure. So when we do all these projections and all of this modeling, this digital rendering, before we move 1 centimeter, before we start working, we've already done an exercise virtually. We've already we've taken it to the population, we've presented it to the municipal council, government council, we've done 1 million iterations. And before anything happens, we've already done it virtually. So we do hydrodynamic simulations, we check density, we check flow, we check the soil textures, hydraulic capacities. We analyze the behavior of rain at a local level, at what time it rains and how it rains, how it affects us, when floods happen, what times do they happen. All of this is important for us. So once we have all of this, then we can already design, and that will give more certainty to the investor. And we have had a very exponential growth in the last 5 years, because more and more in my country, in Costa Rica, which is a country which is a tropical country where rain is so common. It rains the whole year. We only have rain and more rain. And let me tell you about an example. Last year was the most rainy year in 85 years, and Parque H did not suffer from one drop, and it hasn't even been 100% rain. It was only 20%. And they did not suffer. So when the neighbors are seeing their money, Parque H is a small project, only $250,000. It's a small project. And when the people are seeing that there's no effects, precisely what our colleagues just said earlier, if you don't show, you don't sell. That's what our colleague said. So you can publish 100 papers per year, and there's all the data. But if you don't showcase, it doesn't matter. I also can publish a paper, but if you don't showcase, you don't sell. And that's why, and forgive me for taking more time, but I agree with our colleague Vet from Catalonia, because we have made the decision of collaborating with the Technological Costa Rican Institute to design a lab to validate these proposals. And that's where the magic occurs, because we can have a municipality or a government and say, I have such and such need. I need you to do the modelings to see what would happen. And we can resolve these problems using these types of skills. And another thing, we're not inventing anything new here. This is ancestral, really. Our indigenous peoples already knew what to do in the past. They already knew it. More specifically, Blackwater is inspired on the Guayabo heritage, which is a civil engineering water temple. Basically, what we do is imitate what our indigenous people did to control their own floodings from the people. I'm not inventing anything new. I'm simply just using that data. Perfect. I think that the simple fact of responding to or answering or by demonstrating also allows us to have a technical baseline, a clear baseline where you can showcase the pertinence of these solutions. And what I see that private companies or private corporations, from the design to the implementation, can do this. So the question that we were asking ourselves with David when he was organizing this webinar precisely was, well, if the private companies are becoming more organized and they're already doing things, they're already generating services, they're already generating products, what would you still need for the local government to do to create more of these companies? How can they promote innovation? How do you see this? Do you believe that there are things that the government can do? Because in one of the questions that they asked Gustavo, or that they spoke with Bet, they said that there was a plan. For example, I know this quite well, the Puto Viejo plan, we have ordinances, we have national plans, especially now with climate change issues. The simple fact that citizens are beginning to work with these projects, now that there are already many projects that can help to showcase the needs to the population, and that would help us to have a new demand. And you were telling me something which I think is very interesting as well. When there's a direct petition by the public administration, because somebody forced them to be, a promoter was pushing for a technical response, and the promoter seeking that it's not only a response, but something that is actually more successful. And now we're seeing that this is actually happening in the market. And in terms of the last thing about the data you mentioned, but what do you believe that we need from the local governments? Beth, how do you see this? Yes, of course. If the local government has a budget and they're already working on public spaces, we would have to go on to the next step, which is to incentivize companies to use nature-based solutions in their own installations, private companies, logistics companies, or manufacturing, to incentivize private companies to use solutions in their own facilities, in their own properties. I'm not sure if incentivizing with finances or with legislation, maybe by forcing maybe all private properties need to include these types of systems. I'm not sure. That's a bit more complicated, but we need to have an incentive. Public administration is already executing these in their spaces. Now we have to begin to work on private spaces. In private spaces, yes. Via norms, by rules and norms. What comes to mind? Yes. The idea is like, well, many times the solutions are less expensive and they have a direct repercussion on finances. If you use nature-based solutions, you can collect rainwater and you're going to have an actual positive ROI. So you're not going to, you're going to have additional water that you're not going to have to use from potable water sources. You can, so if we try to convince that these are solutions that are useful and cheaper, that can actually solve economic problems, maybe that way we can convince others. But this is not an issue that we're working on quite a bit about rules and regulations. And this is just my personal opinion. And it doesn't have too much backing. Yes, David. I see that some people are leaving because of the time. Well, I think that we can maybe have one last answer and then give the word over to Felix for the closing. What is certain is that we need 5 additional webinars to explore these topics. But yes, we will allow you to finish that last question and we'll close. Thank you. We'll just have a little bit more time to answer. David, so what do? Should we have forced obligations and norms and plans, or what do we need? What do we require? Which David? David, you. Well, this is an issue which is a bit controversial. I can say the following. Well, there's not a lot to invent here. We already have experiences which are very good in Australia and some of the states in the US and London and Norway as well. They have some very nice examples in terms of rules. In fact, the government of Barcelona, they have some rules and norms which are very good. At my country's level, which is what I can talk about, I can't talk about other countries. Well, we are in the diaper phase. We're just in an inception phase. If I don't get my hands dirty right now, we're not going to do anything. And I've become part of a commission in the College of Engineers in my countries in order to draft this, which is going to take a lot of effort. It's going to take a lot of time in order to draft a manual first, nature-based solutions manual, not only for flooding purposes, but also for different topics as well. So I think that I think we're going slow, taking baby steps. However, we're being consistent here. El Salvador has a very good experience as well. They have beautiful regulation. I think things are going. I think nature-based solutions is very innovative. If you start to look on the internet and databases, perhaps you're going to find 1,382 papers ever since 2019 to 2023, where we have authors, Latin American authors. However, we do not have case studies in papers in Latin America. And that's important. And that's super important as well. Well, in Latin America, we do have cases, and as you say, they just haven't drafted the papers. Yes, so we have to invite people that have already done these works to write these papers and describe these things, and that would be interesting. And in order to close, to respect time, as David said, Gustavo, how do you see these local government things? What do you think we're missing here, or what should local governments promote in order to have more of these companies, such as your company, that work from the design to the implementation phase? How do you see this, Gustavo? Gustavo, are you there? Yes. Yes. Please repeat the question. I was asking you, what do you need the local government to do in order to facilitate the creation, encourage innovation in the NBS context in Latin America and Ecuador? Well, promoting research and investigation, that's the weakness that we have in our universities, which is fundamental. And believing in nature-based solutions more, especially at provincial council levels, that in other countries, they have to manage the larger picture. And we are quite worried about the Niño phenomenon, which is going to affect our continent very strongly. We're thinking we might have a super Niño effect this time. And I think about the role that green infrastructures play, or natural infrastructure plays. For example, in this case, forests and the water bodies in their natural state, and how we've been able to how we've been affecting the landscape and trying to reinvest in their restoration. And all these techniques showed us, like the examples in Catalonia and in Costa Rica, these are very important. And will lead us towards that logic so that provincial governments can invest and also municipal governments should invest.
Se involucren más, va a dinamizar ese proceso.
Perfecto, muchísimas gracias. Yo creo que te agradezco mucho, Gustavo, les agradezco mucho a Beda, David. Yo creo que estamos muy entusiasmados con estas soluciones que han generado un nicho de trabajo para todos nosotros, colegas que hemos trabajado y hemos tenido el gusto de imaginar soluciones con naturaleza. Sin embargo, parece que todavía, como decías, David, estamos en pañales en América Latina. Tenemos muchas cosas que se han hecho, pero pocas que se están procesando y generando datos. Me parece también que es importante que las empresas empecemos a empujar muchísimo más hacia esas soluciones. Como decías, tal vez innovar en nuestros propios sectores para entrar con estas soluciones y así generar un producto, entre comillas, nuevo e innovador. Y nada, nosotros hemos trabajado con mis colegas, le agradezco mucho a Daniel y a Micaela, hemos escrito un poco las cosas que nos han ido diciendo y las grandes ideas que podrían nacer de esta conversación para que David Barton pueda tener una base. Y me parece que incentivar las SBN desde lo privado puede hacer que se muevan las cosas también. Y creo que con eso yo cerraría. Creo que es importante que...
I would close with that. I think it's important to create a network and for us to show our examples and to be better connected in our work. As you were saying, David, we're not reinventing lukewarm water. So it's interesting for these new networks of companies and experience to help us reach a more sustainable path with nature-based solutions that will better support climate change and help us face risk. So that's all for me.
Thank you so much, Grace, and an incredible job you've done with your, I imagine, I thought it was you doing everything, but you've even mobilized some colleagues, so that's really great. Thanks for the Miro board. I think we're going to keep using that in the webinar. It's a super tool for summarizing. And I don't know if I dare ask you back because I don't know how we could manage without you. So muchísimas gracias por eso.
I loved the session. I loved the examples, the discussions of the barriers, how to overcome them. I'm simply going to promote the monitoring of the same, and then I'll give the floor and in final instance to Felix. Can you see my screen? Yes, we can see it. Okay, so I think it's evident that we need to meet again. We have a lot to talk about. Lots of examples to share, to be inspired. This list of subjects isn't written or set in stone. I don't know if that's a saying in Spanish, but for the next session, we're going to invite companies that have managed to overcome the first few years and become consolidated. And we'd like to invite you to present how you did this to build your business. This will be the topic for September. I'd like to invite you to join us and to share your experiences about how you made your business grow, and we're going to diffuse these topics as well. So that's all. I'd just like to thank you for your participation and give the floor to Felix once again. Thank you very much, all of you, Gustavo, David, Bet, Grace, for facilitating today. Thank you, Doctor.
Yeah, thank you very much. Can you close your screen? Okay, yeah, also just a few last words from my side. Thank you very much to all of you for the presentations and for the debate. As you have already seen in the chat, we would like to ask you to take a minute or two to give us feedback. There's an English and in Spanish link you can find in the chat to feedback form. So thank you very much for this. And then we would like to announce our next in-person event, the next Cities Talk Nature conference. It will take place in November, 23 to 24th of November this year. It will take place in Envigado in Colombia on rethinking urban-rural linkages for people and biodiversity. You will find more information soon on our Cities Talk Nature website, which was also posted in the chat. So you will find more information there soon. And otherwise, there's nothing more to say from my side except thank you, and hope to see you next time again. Thank you very much, and have a good day.